They thought silence meant weakness. But the moment Hannah Brooks walked through those glass doors, something invisible began to shift, something none of them were prepared to understand. The gym smelled of rubber mats and metal, the low hum of weights clanking mixing with careless laughter that bounced off the walls like it belonged there. At the center of it all stood Dylan Cross, 6'1", broad shoulders, the kind of presence people noticed before they even heard his voice, and right now, his voice was the loudest thing in the room. He leaned casually against a bench, surrounded by a small circle of followers who laughed a little too quickly at everything he said, the kind of laughter that wasn't about humor but approval. And then there was Hannah, stepping in quietly, 5'6", barely 120 pounds, wearing faded jeans and a plain white t-shirt, her hair tied back without effort, her expression unreadable. She didn't look around for attention, didn't try to fit in, didn't try to disappear either. She just moved forward like she had every right to be there, even if no one else believed it. Dylan noticed immediately. He always did. His eyes narrowed slightly, the corners of his mouth lifting into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You lost?" he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. And just like that, the room turned toward her. Conversation slowed, then stopped, replaced by curiosity sharpened with judgment. Hannah didn't respond. Not a glance, not a word. She kept walking, calm, steady, as if his voice hadn't even reached her. That silence only made him more interested. "Hey," he pushed off the bench, stepping closer, his presence filling the space between them. "I'm talking to you." A few people chuckled, waiting for her to react, waiting for the moment she'd shrink, apologize, or turn away like so many before her. But Hannah stopped just short of him, her eyes lifting slowly, meeting his for the first time, steady, unshaken, and for a brief second, something unfamiliar flickered across Dylan's face. It was gone almost instantly, replaced by amusement, but the room felt it. A shift, a tension, the kind that comes right before everything changes, even if no one can explain why. The silence did not break, it thickened, stretching across the room like something alive as every eye stayed locked on Hannah Brooks, waiting for the moment she would fold. Because that was how this place worked, pressure first, then laughter, then someone walking away smaller than before. But she did not move, not the way they expected, not the way Dylan Cross had seen 100 times before. Instead, she simply held his gaze, steady and unreadable, as if she had already decided something long before she walked through those doors, and that unsettled him more than any argument ever could. He let out a short laugh, louder now, sharper, trying to pull the room back under his control. "You do not talk much, do you?" he said, circling slightly, making sure everyone could see, making sure the moment belonged to him again. A few people joined in with quiet chuckles, but it was different now. Thinner, uncertain, like they were not quite sure where this was going. And in the far corner, the girl who had been singled out earlier watched closely, her arms folded tight, her expression caught somewhere between worry and hope, because she recognized something in Hannah that the others did not. Something calm, something grounded, something that did not react to noise. Dylan stopped directly in front of Hannah again, closer this time, testing the invisible boundary between them. "People come in here to prove something," he continued, his tone slower, more deliberate. "But I do not think you are ready for that." The words were meant to land like a verdict, final, dismissive, the kind that usually ended the conversation. But Hannah did not step back. She did not look away. She simply shifted her weight slightly, balanced, controlled, like someone who understood exactly where she stood. And for the briefest moment, Dylan hesitated. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there, a crack in the rhythm he relied on. He masked it quickly, glancing around at the others, expecting reinforcement, expecting laughter to follow. But instead there was a pause, a quiet that felt heavier than before, and somewhere in that silence, the room began to realize that this was no longer a simple exchange. This was something else, something that had not yet revealed itself. And as Hannah's eyes remained steady, calm, and unwavering, the unspoken question hung in the air, not about whether she would break, but about what would happen when she finally decided not to. The tension did not fade. It deepened, pressing into the room like a weight no one could quite name. And Dylan Cross felt it slipping from his control, even if he refused to admit it. His jaw tightened slightly, as he forced a smirk back onto his face, the kind that had always worked before, the kind that turned discomfort into entertainment. "You know what?" he said, louder now, clapping his hands once as if resetting the moment. "Let us make this simple." A few heads turned again, drawn back into the performance he was trying to rebuild. "Everyone here has to prove they belong. That is how this works," he continued, pacing a slow circle, his voice carrying across the mats. "You walk in, you show what you can do, or you step aside." The implication hung clearly in the air, and this time, he did not hide it. This was no longer casual teasing. This was a challenge, and the room leaned into it, waiting, watching, because now there were stakes. Now there was something to witness. Hannah did not respond immediately, and that pause stretched just long enough to make people shift on their feet, just long enough for the moment to feel uncertain again. Her eyes moved briefly, not to Dylan, but past him, to the girl in the corner, the one still standing quietly, shoulders slightly hunched, as if she had been told her place too many times to question it anymore. And something in Hannah's expression softened for a fraction of a second before returning to that same calm stillness. She stepped forward, not aggressive, not hesitant, just deliberate, and the sound of her shoes against the mat seemed louder than it should have been, echoing in a space that had gone completely silent. Dylan raised an eyebrow, amused again, or at least pretending to be. "There we go," he said, nodding slowly. "Finally." But there was something different in his tone now. Something tighter, something less certain, because Hannah was not reacting the way he expected. She was not proving anything to him. She was not reacting to the crowd. She was simply moving on her own terms, and that made it impossible to predict what would happen next. The people around them leaned closer, forming an unspoken circle, the kind that appears when everyone senses a turning point. No one laughed now. No one whispered. The energy had shifted completely, and as Hannah came to a stop, just a few feet in front of Dylan, her posture relaxed but grounded, her eyes steady and unshaken, the room held its breath, because somewhere deep down, everyone felt it. This was no longer about whether she belonged. This was about whether everything they believed about strength was about to be proven wrong. For a moment, nothing happened, and that was what made it unsettling, because everyone expected something immediate, something loud, something obvious. But Hannah Brooks did not rush. She did not react to the eyes on her or the pressure in the air. She simply stood there, grounded, her breathing steady, her presence quiet but undeniable. And that quiet began to stretch across the room like a mirror, forcing everyone to confront their own expectations. Dylan Cross tilted his head slightly, studying her now instead of performing for the crowd. His confidence still there, but no longer effortless. "Go ahead," he said, gesturing casually as if granting permission, though the edge in his voice betrayed something else, something closer to curiosity than control. A few people shifted positions, leaning in, waiting for a mistake, waiting for hesitation, waiting for proof that she was exactly who they thought she was. But Hannah did not give them any of that. Instead, she took a slow step forward, her movement controlled, deliberate, the kind that came from practice rather than impulse. And then she paused again, not for effect, not for approval, but because she was choosing her moment. And that was when it became clear, this was not a reaction. This was intention. Dylan noticed it too, his arms lowering slightly from their relaxed stance, his focus sharpening, because for the first time, he could not predict what she would do next, and unpredictability was something he was not used to, especially not from someone he had already judged. "You see that?" he said to the others, forcing a half laugh. "She is thinking about it." But the laughter that followed was weak, uncertain, because everyone else could feel it now, that this was not hesitation, this was control, the kind that does not rush, the kind that does not need to prove anything quickly, the kind that waits until the exact right second. And then, without warning, Hannah moved, not aggressively, not wildly, but with a precision that cut through the tension like a blade, a simple shift of position, a controlled motion that redirected the space between them, subtle enough that some almost missed it, but powerful enough that Dylan instinctively adjusted his footing, his balance disrupted not by force but by timing. And that was when it happened. The room went silent, completely, no laughter, no whispers, not even the sound of movement, just a stillness that settled in as realization began to spread. Because what they had just witnessed was not luck, it was not chance, it was skill, quiet, disciplined, undeniable. And as Dylan steadied himself, his expression no longer amused but searching, trying to understand what had just shifted, one thing became clear to everyone watching. Hannah Brooks had never been unsure, not for a single second, and whatever came next was not going to go the way anyone had expected. No one spoke, not because they were told to be quiet, but because something inside the room had shifted beyond noise, beyond ego, beyond the usual rhythm they all understood, and Dylan Cross felt it more than anyone. Even if he refused to show it, his stance changed, subtle but undeniable, his shoulders no longer loose, his attention no longer scattered. He was focused now, fully, the way someone becomes when they realize they may have misjudged the situation. That was, he paused, searching for the right word, something to reclaim control. Interesting, he finished, though the words sounded weaker than he intended, because what had just happened did not fit into his usual script. Hannah Brooks did not respond. She did not acknowledge his words. She simply remained where she was, balanced, composed, her presence calm but immovable, and that calm began to press against the room even harder, forcing everyone to reconsider what they thought they were watching. A few people exchanged glances, uncertain now, unsure whether to lean into the moment or step back from it, because the dynamic had changed, and everyone could feel it. Dylan took a slow step forward again, more cautious this time, testing, measuring, not with arrogance, but with awareness. "You trained somewhere," he said, quieter now, less of a statement, more of a question, and for the first time since she walked in, Hannah moved her gaze slightly, not away, but deeper, as if acknowledging the shift without giving anything away. Her silence was no longer passive. It was intentional, controlled, and it unsettled him more than any response could have, because silence like that does not ask for attention, it commands it. The room remained still, no laughter, no distractions, just the low hum of tension building again, but differently this time. Not from mockery, but from anticipation. Dylan adjusted his footing once more, slower, more deliberate, and then he made a choice, not to step back, but to engage, to see it through, because pride does not retreat easily, especially not in front of an audience. And as he moved, Hannah responded, not aggressively, not dramatically, but with the same precision, the same quiet control, a small shift, a measured adjustment, enough to redirect the moment once again, enough to make it clear that every movement had meaning, every second had purpose, and once again, the room went silent, deeper this time, heavier, because now it was undeniable. This was not a coincidence, this was not luck, this was discipline. And as Dylan stopped, no longer smirking, no longer performing, just watching, trying to understand what stood in front of him, the truth settled in slowly but completely. Hannah Brooks had never been the one being tested, not for a single second, and everyone in that room was only just beginning to realize it. The air in the room no longer felt like a place for showing off. It felt like a line had been drawn, and no one was quite sure who had crossed it. Dylan Cross stood there watching Hannah Brooks with a focus he had never given anyone before. The confidence was still there, but it had changed shape. No longer loud, no longer careless. It had become guarded, measured, because something about her refused to fit into the role he had assigned her, and that made everything uncertain. "You are not just standing there for nothing," he said slowly, his voice lower now, not for the crowd but for her. People do not move like that unless they know exactly what they are doing. It was not an accusation, not even a challenge anymore. It was closer to recognition, and that alone shifted the energy again. A few people in the circle glanced at each other, sensing that the dynamic had completely reversed. Hannah did not respond with words, but this time her stillness felt different. It was no longer just calm, it was decisive, like she had reached the point where nothing left needed to be proven. She took a small step forward, controlled, balanced, her posture relaxed yet precise, and Dylan instinctively adjusted again, not out of fear, but out of awareness, his body responding before his mind could fully process why. And that was when it became undeniable to everyone watching. He was no longer leading this moment. He was reacting to it. The shift was subtle but absolute, the kind that does not announce itself but changes everything. Someone in the back exhaled quietly, the sound cutting through the silence like a reminder that time was still moving. But no one else dared to speak, because whatever was happening here had gone beyond words. Hannah moved again, not faster, not stronger, just exact, every motion placed with intention, guiding the space rather than forcing it, and Dylan followed without realizing it, his footing adjusting, his stance recalibrating, as if he had been pulled into a rhythm he did not control, and then it stopped, not with a dramatic finish, not with a declaration, but with stillness, complete and final. Dylan stood where he was, no longer advancing, no longer testing, just standing. And for the first time since the moment began, he did not try to fill the silence. He did not try to reclaim the room, because something in him understood that it was already gone. The room remained frozen, every eye locked on Hannah, waiting for something more, a statement, a reaction, anything. But she offered nothing, just that same quiet presence, steady and unshaken. And in that silence, the realization settled fully. Strength had never needed to be loud, and the person they thought would break had been the only one in control the entire time. No one dared to break the silence, not after what they had just witnessed, because something deeper than pride had shifted in that room, something that could not be undone with a joke or a louder voice. Dylan Cross stood still, his breathing steady, but his posture no longer dominant, no longer claiming space the way it had before, and for the first time, he looked at Hannah Brooks without the filter of assumption, without the ease of judgment, just watching, trying to understand what he had missed, what everyone had missed. "You could have said something," he finally muttered, the words quieter than anyone had ever heard from him, not directed at the crowd, not even fully directed at her, but somewhere in between, like he was speaking to the moment itself. And that was when Hannah moved again, not to engage, not to continue, but to step back, a single controlled step that reset the space between them, not as retreat, but as closure. And that subtle difference was felt by everyone. Because it was clear now, she was not stepping away out of pressure, she was choosing to end it, on her terms. The circle around them loosened slightly, people shifting as if released from something they did not realize had held them in place. And in the far corner, the girl who had been humiliated earlier straightened just a little, her shoulders lifting, her eyes no longer avoiding the room, because what she had just seen changed something inside her too. Dylan noticed it, his gaze flicking briefly in her direction before returning to Hannah, and for a moment, he looked like he might say more, might try to reclaim something, but the words never came, because there was nothing left to prove, nothing left to challenge. The outcome had already been decided without a single raised voice, without a single demand, just quiet control and unwavering presence. Hannah turned slightly, her attention no longer on Dylan, no longer on the room, but on the exit ahead, and as she began to walk, her steps calm, measured, unchanged, no one stopped her, no one spoke. The gym that had once been filled with noise now held only the echo of what had just happened, and as she passed by, the girl she had silently defended met her eyes for a brief second, a look of gratitude, of understanding, and Hannah gave the smallest nod, barely noticeable, before continuing forward, leaving behind a room that would not forget what silence had just done. And as the door opened and closed behind her, the stillness remained, heavier now, because everyone inside knew one simple truth had just been proven in a way none of them could ignore. Respect had not been demanded, it had been taken without a single word. The door closed softly behind Hannah Brooks, but the silence she left behind did not move with her. It stayed, heavy and unmoving, pressing into every corner of the room like a reminder no one could shake. And for a long moment, no one spoke, not even Dylan Cross, who still stood in the same place, his posture no longer commanding, no longer certain, just still, as if he was replaying every second that had just unfolded, trying to find the moment where it had slipped from his control. But there was no single moment. That was the truth. It had never been his to control in the first place. Someone near the back shifted their weight, the sound small but loud in the quiet, and another person let out a slow breath, like the room itself was beginning to wake up from something it did not fully understand. Dylan finally moved, just a step, then another, not toward the center, not toward anyone, just enough to break the frozen stance he had been locked in. His eyes glanced briefly toward the group that had been laughing earlier, but they did not meet his gaze the same way anymore. There was hesitation now, something unspoken, Because what they had seen could not be undone by a joke or dismissed by confidence. It had changed how they looked at him, even if only slightly. And that was something he felt immediately. The girl in the corner stood a little straighter now, her arms no longer folded tightly across her chest, her eyes no longer lowered. She looked around the room, not with fear, but with awareness, like she had just realized something important, something she would not forget, and Dylan noticed that too, his jaw tightening for a brief second before he looked away, not out of defeat, but out of recognition, because deep down, he understood that what had happened was not about losing. It was about being shown something he had never considered before. The room slowly began to return to movement, people picking up weights, adjusting positions, pretending to continue as if nothing had happened. But it was different now. The energy quieter, more measured, like everyone was carrying a piece of that moment with them. And as the minutes passed, one truth settled in deeper than the silence itself. No one mentioned Hannah Brooks. No one needed to, because her absence spoke louder than anything they could say. And somewhere in that quiet understanding, the space she had walked through just moments ago felt different, not because she had forced it to change, but because she had revealed something that had always been there, something no one could ignore anymore. The rest of the afternoon passed, but not the way it had begun, not with loud voices and easy laughter, because something unseen had settled into the space, something that lingered long after Hannah Brooks had walked out those doors, and even as weights lifted and conversations cautiously returned, there was a restraint now, a hesitation that had not existed before. Dylan Cross moved through the gym differently too, not weaker, not smaller, but quieter, his voice no longer cutting across the room the same way, his presence no longer demanding attention without effort. He caught himself more than once, starting to say something, then stopping, as if measuring the weight of his own words for the first time, and that change did not go unnoticed. People who once leaned in quickly now paused, watching, thinking, because respect had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. The girl in the corner, whose name no one had bothered to ask earlier, picked up her bag slowly, her posture no longer folded inward, her steps more certain as she walked across the mat, passing by the same space where she had stood frozen before, and no one stopped her. No one questioned her, because something about the room had changed its rules without anyone announcing it. And Dylan saw her too, just for a moment, their eyes meeting briefly, and instead of a smirk or a comment, there was nothing, just a quiet acknowledgement before he looked away, and that silence carried more meaning than anything he could have said before. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement, and somewhere beyond those walls, Hannah continued on as if nothing unusual had happened, her steps steady, her expression unchanged. Because for her, it had never been about proving anything to anyone. It had simply been about not allowing someone else to define her space. And back inside the gym, that lesson remained, not spoken, not written, but understood in a way that would stay with them long after the day ended. Because sometimes the most powerful moments do not come with noise or recognition, they come quietly, shifting something fundamental in the people who witnessed them. And that day, without a single raised